Y'all behaving over there? Let's go a little bit bigger. There we go. All right. Looks like we're about 10 seconds behind on the thing here. The cash okay? Okay. All right, good to see everyone tonight. Appreciate you being here. We're going to continue on in our study that we've done. For our church people, don't forget Sunday is our last Sunday for the picture day. Be after church, I guess, like they did before. So if you didn't have your family pictures made or individual pictures made, Miss Melinda and Eddie will take care of you after the service. Last week we started just a brief series of messages on just called it 4 Kids, looking at the 4 Hebrew children in the book of Daniel, and the thought behind it was, why Daniel? Why was Daniel the one who was going to be the connection or the connector of really Old Testament prophecy as far as the last days go to what we have in the book of Revelation? And they're pretty much, you really need Daniel to give a better insight, or Revelation uses Daniel, and Daniel uses Revelation, as Jesus said, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet, and mentions him specifically. Christ mentions other prophets as along with Elijah, Isaiah, Ezekiel, and others, but Daniel specifically related to these end times. And we did just a little bit last week in the names that these 4, these were not the only Hebrew children, but these were the 4 that were mentioned in Daniel. And it's not that the others were compromisers or anything else along those lines, or did not fulfill their role as Hebrews or left their Hebrew heritage. But specifically, Daniel and these 4, Mishael, Ananias, and or Hananiah, Mishael, and forgetting the first one, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Those are the ones. And then we know them as Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. But we always knew Daniel as Daniel. He was given a Babylonian name as well, Belteshazzar. And a couple things that we didn't really bring out, loosely interpreted as far as their Babylonian names. Daniel, we said God is meant like God is my judge. And Belteshazzar, you hear the word Bel in there, and that meaning the Babylonian false god Baal, and that name means Baal will protect. Hananiah means God is gracious, and we made this mention last week that each one of those 4 had the mention of God in their name. And Hananiah's name was changed to Shadrach, and that meaning inspiration of the sun. Mishael, God is without equal. And they changed his name to belonging to Aku. And then Azariah, the Lord is my helper, to Abednego, servant of Nego. So while these names were given to them in the Chaldean tongue, especially these 4, did not forsake or leave their heritage. Call it Hebrew, call it Jewish, call it whatever you want. They did not leave their heritage that they had of God. And it's interesting to note, they are not just across the mountain range from their home in Jerusalem. As we look here at this, if you were to look at a map, Jerusalem, Babylon, as far as the main place of the empire that Nebuchadnezzar was over, is in modern day Baghdad. And if you look on a map, that is not just a walking distance or a day's trip or anything along those lines. It took would take several months, if not years, for them to be able to get there. And so when they were taken away, one of the things that we did not make mention of, we mentioned that they were the characteristics that they did have, but when they were taken, they were of the king's seed, meaning they were of royal blood. So they had the Jewish, or the bloodline of the Judah kings. Let me get that out in them. Whether or not they were in line for succession, I don't see that being, because that was not evidenced in Scripture or put forth. But we do see a split, even with we looked at this last week with Daniel saying, "Look, give us this pulse to eat." The other children were given the same thing, and it's not that anything negative against them or anything, and we looked at probably not so much the fact of what they were eating, but that made their countenance better, but just the fact that was probably more used to what they were, or used to what they were eating, rather than I've never really tried Thai or Indian food, and if I did, it probably would not go well. So I'm sure there was a difference in the diets, not just amongst the things they could eat, but also the types of meat, and that would have been the biggest thing. So when we looked at Daniel, his name stayed throughout the book. It's only mentioned Belteshazzar twice, and probably a good reason for being, not really to hone in or speculate on it, but he's the author of the book, would have been a very good reason. Plus the book carries his name, the person who is going to be the main character. We know him by Daniel, not as Belteshazzar. So the book name is not named Belteshazzar, but Daniel. And as far as the other three goes, no doubt they probably all four their name was used within their role as whatever their social role, political role was. There's some evidence that these three, between Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, were involved in the bureaucracy there in the Babylonian Empire. One of them meaning that closely related to the Greek god of Hermes, and the Roman god of Mercury for travel or correspondence and those types of things. So perhaps he was in that role. And again, speculation, nothing really too deep to go into there. But these three children, along with Daniel, had the innate, I guess is a good word, but it was taught to them how to behave in the setting of royalty. And that, as I said last week, I would not do good in that setting. If I were placed amongst royalty and stuff like that, I won't say a disdain, but I just don't look at royalty like they're somebody special. They put their pants on just like I do. They brush their teeth and hair just like I do. I don't really look at them as having any special privilege or anything else along those lines because of what family they were born into. It's not that I disrespect it or anything along those lines. I just don't see that. And that goes the same thing as far as church goes and everything else along those lines. I'm not anybody special amongst anybody else because I carry a title of pastor or anything else along those lines. Miss Amy does not carry the title of the, what are some of them called, the queen? The first lady of the church and stuff like that. We just don't call each other that. I don't call her the first lady. She doesn't call me the bishop or anything else along those lines. And nothing wrong with those titles, but I just want to be simple, huh? The Rev, I don't want to be. I just want to be a common person as far as that goes, not only in the sight of man, but also in the sight of God. So when we're looking at Daniel now, we saw a couple things why when we asked the question why. And the Bible gave us, we looked at one of these things here, and we'll go a little bit deeper in this tonight, to where Daniel is going to come along, and he is going to have more wisdom than the people who Nebuchadnezzar has already had in place for no telling how many years. And as they stood before the king, in verse number 19 of chapter 1, there were none like unto these four. So these four have separated themselves from the other children that were brought along. And they're all three Hebrew names are used here, not names that were given to them back in verse, what was it? Verse number 2. Verse number 7 is where they were given their Chaldean names. But as they stood before the king, and this is an interesting thought here, that they did not buck or bulk or rebel against the king. This was where they were going to be. And this is where Daniel would never go back to the promised land. The Babylonian Empire, it was going to be his home for the rest of his life. He did not return once the exile was over. That 70 years, there's no recorded evidence of him going back. We do know that the Jews that were there, that they went back. We got Nehemiah and Ezra and others that came back according to the decree that they were given. But in all manners of wisdom and understanding, and as these, and when in verse number 19, a very interesting word here is that the king communed with them. He did not look at them necessarily as outsiders. He looked at them as assets, and that they were going to be a benefit to his kingdom. This is why he wanted them, back as we looked over in the previous verses, he wanted whoever these children were that were going to be picked of the king's seed, that they might learn the tongue of the Chaldeans, so that they might share with them. He knew there was some wealth, not just of the wealth that they had taken out of the temple, but something that they could bring with them to see. We know Nebuchadnezzar is going to get to the point where he's going to be high and lifted up, and he's going to think himself to be above God. And God's going to humble him and make him as a beast of the field. And then when he comes to himself and he realizes this, he begins to worship the same God. So Nebuchadnezzar was the tool that God used to execute his judgment upon his people, and he boasted himself that it was all of his doing, and God struck him down. But here he realizes that these especially these four, have something about them that is different. He communed with them. He talked with them. They stood before the king, as far as in verse number 19, meaning they served the king. They did not say, "We're not going to serve you, you pagan king." And I don't want to say they compromised in any way. They never did. Daniel did not compromise. We know in his later years, when the decree was put out that he should not pray, he didn't close his windows to pray. I think he just left the windows open and said, "I'm going to be praying at this time. You want to come by and see me? Come by and see me." And then, of course, we know he was cast into the den of lions. And when we see the other three, Mishael, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, when the trumpet blows, they didn't purposely hide themselves when they knew that was going to be blown. They said, "We're not going to bow." And they knew what that meant, that they did not compromise their standing or their relationship with God in serving in a country that was not their own. And that is something that you and I can take with us today, because this world is not our home. And we don't need to compromise who and what we are, even though we are serving and living in this world. None of us right now are walking on the streets of gold. As far as I know, none of my streets are. If they were, I'd be getting the pickaxe out and everything. But we are, every one of us have a place or a position in which we are serving in some capacity. I forget what was the joke I said I was going to make. I was going to tell Miss Shelley about tonight that we heard something about a medical office manager or something like that, and it just goes crazy and stuff. Oh, you heard it? Okay. I said, I'm gonna let Shelley know that tonight. You did? Okay. And so you could probably relate to that interview that was being made and everything when all that was said. Because as soon as they said that, I just looked at Amy and said, "I'm going to tell Shelley that tonight." But we all serve in that capacity right now in different ways to different people, whether it be a boss, whether it be our fellow man, whatever it may be. But we don't have to compromise our relationship with God, nor should we. And as they are here, the Bible says, verse number 20, "In all manners of wisdom and understanding, that the king inquired of them." He came to them, and he said he found them 10 times better than any of his magicians or astrologers that were in all his realm, not just in Babylon, but anywhere. And of course, we know what's going to happen in chapter 2 with Nebuchadnezzar. He's going to have his dream. And I believe this is where Daniel is going to start to separate himself from the other three. Not that he's better, whatever you want to say. We're not trying to set up a hierarchy here of who's best or anything else along those lines. But there is a separation even between these four, Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, versus Daniel, because we see the story. We know the account that we have of the image that was created. When the music played, they were to bow, and they said no. Well, Daniel's not in that story. Daniel's not in that account, nor is Daniel in that picture. Does that mean that Daniel bowed? I doubt it very seriously. Daniel bowed. We don't have scriptural evidence, but knowing Daniel be who he is and who he was given in the scriptures, I would say no, Daniel didn't bow either. He may not even been in the place where this was going on, because Daniel is going to be promoted to a place in chapter number 2 because of this dream and this interpretation. And I'm not going to read through all of it. It's a pretty lengthy chapter. 49 verses and stuff like that. But you remember, just giving you a real quick synopsis of this, that Daniel is not sought counsel on this to begin with. And this is what's interesting. I think in verse number 20, this is more of a collective statement out of the picture of everything that had happened. And in chapter number 2 is perhaps an account of how this statement came to be, how these four were revered, how they were 10 times better than all the magicians and the astrologers. And then he gives an account as to how that is. Now, if that's not exactly how it went, again, not a big deal. But the king, remember, he would dream, and then he would wake up, and he couldn't remember his dream. All he could remember is that it troubled him so bad. And so the problem was when he goes to his people say, in verse number 3, he said, and the king said unto them, in verse 2, he's called the magicians, the astrologers, and the sorcerers, and the Chaldeans to show the king his dream. So they came and stood before the king. And the king said unto him, I have dreamed a dream, and my spirit was troubled to know the dream. Then spake the Chaldeans to the king in Syriac, that's that language, O king, live forever. Tell thy servants the dream, and we will show the interpretation. And this is where the conundrum comes in, verse number 5. The king answered and said to the Chaldeans, the thing is gone from me. There's a colon. Can you imagine the pause? Can you imagine this group of people that he has assembled, and they just look around at each other? It's like, okay, he wants us to interpret something that he can't remember himself. We're supposed to know what he dreamt, and he can't even tell it what it was. He says, if you will not make known unto me the dream with the interpretation thereof, you shall be cut in pieces, and your houses shall be made a dunghill. But if you show the dream and the interpretation thereof, you shall receive of me gifts and rewards, great honor. Therefore show me the dream and the interpretation thereof. And they answered again and said, let the king tell his servants the dream, and we will show the interpretation of it. So there it is again. They said, they tried to compel him and say to him, look, just tell us what the dream is, and we can interpret it. The king answered and said, I know of certainty that you would gain the time, because you see this thing is gone from me. And what is he saying there? He says, you are stalling. You are trying to, and he said, but if you'll not make known unto me the dream, there is but one decree for you. I mean, you want to talk about somebody who's Nebuchadnezzar wasn't messing around. You call him obtuse or whatever you want, but he was very direct and very sharp in his response. And he says, for ye have prepared lying and corrupt words to speak before me till the time be changed. Therefore tell me the dream, and I shall know that you can show me the interpretation of. And now they finally answered, and the Chaldeans answered before the king and said, there is not a man upon the earth that can show the king's matter. Not true. It's not about the man, it's about God. And when we look here, he says, therefore there is no king, Lord, no ruler that asks such things at any magician, astrologer, or Chaldean. I don't know about you, but now they're telling the king, what you are asked, is impossible to be done. And not only that, no other king would ask this. I can see him being enraged. They are a rare thing that the king requires, and there is none other that can show thee before the king except the gods, whose dwelling is not with flesh. For this cause the king was angry and very furious, and commanded to destroy all the wise men of Babylon. And the decree went forth, and they sought Daniel and his fellows to be slain. So Daniel is locked in with this group, even though he's not there. And then Daniel answered with the counsel of the wisdom to Arioch, the captain of the king's guard, which was gone forth to slay the wise men of Babylon. So this is sort of like the decree that's going on in Esther, where Haman has issued that decree for all the Jews to be slain, and it's a done deal. And he says, why is the decree so hasty with the king? Daniel has no idea what's going on, nor has he had any part of it. And Daniel went to his house and made the thing known to Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah in verse 17, and his companions. So they are with him there, that they would desire mercies of God of heaven concerning this secret, that Daniel and his fellows should not perish with the rest of the wise men of Babylon. Then the secret was revealed to Daniel in a night vision, and Daniel blessed not the gods of heaven, but the God of heaven. And we went back to verse number 1, or chapter number 1, where we asked the question, why Daniel? And by verse number 8, and Daniel purposed in his heart. That is the thing about Daniel that separates him, and why that he would not only defile himself, but it's purposing in his heart. Not the fact of defiling himself to eat meat that wasn't a sacrifice to idols, whatever else it was. He was not going to let anything come between him and his relationship with God, much less foolishness that has been decreed. Not necessarily foolishness by the king, but these wise men, supposed wise men, made things worse by saying no king would ever ask this, and telling their king, no king would. You just have now stirred up the hornet's nest. And so he comes before the king, and he goes through, and the king the king had ordained to destroy everybody. And Daniel in verse 27, and Daniel answered in the presence of the king. So now he's before Nebuchadnezzar, and he said, the secret which the king hath demanded cannot the wise men, the astrologers, the magicians, the soothsayers show unto the king. But there is a God in heaven. And here it is again. He has purpose in his heart. He is going to reveal. Just the same as Daniel revealed to this king, who's something that was impossible to reveal. We're going to have in Daniel 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12, things that are revealed that at the time seemed impossible to happen, and things that are revealed in Revelation, even in the book of Revelation, so that's impossible. Well, 100 years ago they might have been, and we've looked at things like the two witnesses' bodies laying dead in the city, in the streets of Jerusalem, or in the street of Jerusalem, and all the world seeing it. 100 years ago, somebody would have said, how can all the world see that? We know right now that can happen that fast. With the tragic event that we had happen of the assassination a few weeks ago, the whole world saw that, and literally almost instantaneously knew what was going on. So Daniel has this ability to not only to interpret dreams, but to interpret things that no other man can, because no other man knows them, but as they are revealed unto him by God. And that's what he's going to do in chapter 7 through 12 as well, just not for that time. Matter of fact, he's going to say, when is this? And he's told, seal it up. It's not time. It's for another time. And then as he goes through here in verse number 8, but there is a God in heaven. I want you to go back with me a couple places in Scripture real quick on that phrase, but there is a God in heaven. You want to talk about it? I mean, man, you talk about a candy stick to preach. There's you a phrase right there. In Genesis chapter 40, we got the story, or the account of, I don't like calling the Bible stories, they're accounts, they're not made up. We've got Joseph in jail. We've got the butler and the baker there. Their two dreams are given to Joseph, and Joseph interprets them correctly. And they said unto him, we have dreamed a dream, and there is no interpretation of it. And Joseph said unto them, do not interpretations belong to who? I'm sorry, verse number 8, Genesis 40, verse 8. The butler and the baker have said to him, we've dreamed, but who can interpret what these things are? You can go back and look at their dreams, and Joseph said unto them, do not interpretations belong to God? Let me tell you something. That has not changed. God can still interpret dreams. And there is a reason why we still dream. You say, man, you're getting into mysticism and spiritualness and all that kind of stuff now. No, I think it's something that, for lack of a better word, not fear, but just saying, the Bible does teach us that when that which is perfect is come, that which is in part shall be done away with, as far as some of the gifts that were there and those types of things. But he says, tell me them, I pray you. Why was Joseph saying, okay, God's the one who can interpret it, but there's got to be that vessel who is the message or the interpreter or the channel that God uses to interpret them. And the chief told the dream, and Joseph said unto him what it was, and then he told the butler his dream, and the same. So you saw there in verse number 8, it says, God is the interpreter of these, nobody else but God. And in a matter of fact, the astrologers didn't even have it right. They knew it was above them. They just thought it was a higher source. Well, there are no other gods but God. He said, there is no other God but me. And so at least they were right in the fact that man couldn't do it. It just, they didn't have the right gods. And so Daniel is of the same persuasion. He says, there is a God in heaven there in verse number, in Genesis chapter 40, verse number 8. Go on me over to Amos, the book of Amos, in chapter number 4, I believe it is. Let me make sure. Yeah, chapter 4 in verse number 13. And when we look at this thought that is here, again, there is a God in heaven. Okay? The location of God as far as his throne is heaven. Is he omnipresent? Absolutely. Is he omnipotent? Absolutely. Is he omniscient? Absolutely. He's all-knowing, all-powerful, he's present everywhere. But his throne is in heaven. And in Amos chapter 4, verse number 13, for lo, he that formeth the mountains and createth the wind and declareth unto man what is his thought. So this is kind of a connection here. These dreams are remember Joseph, what was he going to do? He wasn't just going to interpret the butler and the baker's dreams. Who was he going to interpret later that was going to save the whole known world at that time? He's going to interpret Pharaoh's dreams. Nobody else could do it. They couldn't tell what was going on. They knew that dream. This is Nebuchadnezzar. This is something that has not been done before, as far as a quote unquote dream interpreter in that. And Daniel is not. God reveals it to him without Nebuchadnezzar reading it to Daniel, because it is God's thought that he had for that. So, and I'm not going to get into mysticism or anything else like that, but there is something to those dreams in the Old Testament being the thoughts of God being placed in man. How did he warn the wise men not to go back to see Herod? He warned them in a what? In a dream. Those were his thoughts. So say what you want to about that. Again, study for another time, but just he says here, and his thought that maketh the morning darkness and treadeth upon the high places of the earth, the Lord, the God of hosts is his name. There's some things that we don't give God credit to, that he is way above anything that we ever ask, think, or talk, not even that we've thought about. And when we think about things that we're dreaming, if there's something that I don't want to say, you ate indigestion or something. You got indigestion and you had an upset stomach, whatever. I'm not talking about that. But there's been some times in my life, I'll tell the story, it's kind of funny. Before Miss Amy and I ever met, I got to the point to where, you know what, man, I'm done. I'm going to quit trying to look for a wife and stuff like that. And I had a dream that I was marrying my sister. And I was like, ooh. I woke up in cold sweat. Well, my sister's name is Amy. And then I was going to meet her, not too long after that. You say, come on. I'm not saying it is, but I'm also not discounting that it was. There's just some things that we don't know. Our finite mind cannot comprehend. But we do have scripture here of how he worked through dreams and that. And so, you say, well, that was Old Testament. Argument could be made for that. Again, not going to get into that. But as for the time of what Daniel is right here, he said there is a God. And he will reveal your thoughts. That thought you had was on purpose and for a reason. And do you remember what Nebuchadnezzar's dream was about? It was an image, yeah. And it was an image of what? Well, let's go over there and look at that. He said in verse 36, he goes in. Actually, it's too good to pass up. I want to read. Daniel's doing nothing about this interpretation to start with. He just has come in and say, here's your dream. He gives first God the glory. He says, the secret that the king hath demanded cannot the wise men, the astrologers, the magicians, the soothsayers show unto the king. No man can do this. And this is where he gives God glory. Purposing in his heart. But there is a God in heaven, that revealeth secrets. Anybody got their Bible? Oh, I'm right here. Let me go there real quick. Daniel chapter 2, what verse is that? 28. I wanted to pull up, didn't go far enough. Wrong chapter. Give me 1 second. That word for God there is, in the Hebrew, is the word, it's not a word used of God very often. It's not El, it's not Elohim, it's if I'm pronouncing this right, Eloah. Okay? And when we look at this is simply going to mean just simply God. That's what it means. And you say, well, what's the specific name about that? We could get into the actual, follow that word through the scriptures. I mean, it occurs 95 times, that particular name of God. And if you've never done a study on the names of God, I think that y'all have gone through that in Sunday school at some point, haven't you? With Elohim, and Jehovah Jireh. I mean, all the different names of God. What's that? Yeah, I mean, there's many of them, and it's all the same God. It's not the, and this may, and I don't want to speculate here, but this may be where all the different pantheon, or not pantheon, not demigods. All the little gods came off from like the Greeks and that. It's all for God. This God that Daniel said here, he says there is a God in heaven, and it uses that capital G there. He says, and that revealeth, seeketh, and maketh known to the king Nebuchadnezzar what shall be in the latter days. So right here, he's already talking about, not right now, but later. Nebuchadnezzar he says, thy dream and thy visions of thy head upon thy bed are these. As for thee, O king, thy thoughts came into thy mind upon thy bed, what should come to pass hereafter, and he that revealeth secrets made known to thee what shall come to pass. So what is he saying? He says, God is speaking to you through your dream. And he says, but as for me, this secret is not revealed for me. Look at this. For any wisdom that I have more than any living. You know what he's saying? There's nothing special about me. It's not because I'm Hebrew. It's not because I'm Jewish. It's not because my name is Daniel, who my mommy daddy was, anything else like that. He said, but for their sakes shall make known the interpretation of to the king, and that thou mightest know the thoughts of thy heart. Thou, O king, sawest, and behold, a great image. This great image, whose brightness was excellent. Now he's telling them the dream. This isn't the interpretation. You know what he's doing here? He's not just saying, he's not interpreting it. He's showing, I know what your dream was, because God revealed it to me. Can you imagine? I don't know, do we have, let me go back, I forgot to read back up in verse number, Daniel goes in to make the decree in verse 24, not to destroy the wise men, brought in Daniel before the case. He said, I found a man of the captives of Judah. King says, Daniel, whose name is Belteshazzar, art thou not? And so we don't have any record here that all these other wise men and astrologers are there, but I can't help but think that some of them are, because this man's being brought in. Can you imagine them standing there and what they're thinking? This almost reminds me of the person over in the book of Acts. You remember when the apostles were going through and they were healing people, and somebody thought it was for sale and they could buy it. I guarantee you some of these guys are saying, hey man, what could I do with that? Get the winning lottery numbers tonight when they come out on the Babylonian, whatever. They didn't have TV, but anyway, just trying to be funny, but wasn't funny. But anyhow, he says, but as for me, he said, thy secret is known, is not revealed to me for any wisdom, and I have more than any other living. That's my thing. Daniel's saying, it's not me. There is nothing special about me. This is about him and him revealing to you what is going to come later. That is his whole thing behind chapter 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12. It's not even for Daniel to be part of it. He's not one of the two witnesses that's going to be raised again, or who's going to be here in those days, even though some have argued that he was. It's not anything about Daniel, but the fact that he's saying, I'm telling you how it's going to be in the later days, latter days. And he says, thou, O king, sawest and behold a great image. The great image whose brightness was excellent stood before thee, and the form thereof was terrible. Now, when we see that word terrible, that's not frightening or ugly or anything. It's awesome. We've lost some meanings of our words of how they used to be used. Terrible meant something that was just, is magnanimous a word? Yeah, it's a word? Okay, so it was just it was the splendor of it. He says, this image's head was of fine gold. His breast and arms were of silver. His belly and his thighs of brass. His legs of iron. His feet part of iron and part of clay. So throughout the body, you've got different makeups of the material that's making up this image. And he says, thou sawest till that a stone was cut out without hands, which smote the image upon his feet that were of iron and clay, and brake them to pieces. What happens if the feet are broke to pieces? There you go. Then the iron, the clay, and the brass, and the silver, and the gold broke into pieces together and became like the chaff of the summer threshing floors. And the wind carried them away, that no place was found for them. And the stone that smote the image became a great mountain and filled the whole earth. That's his dream. That's what he saw. And he could not remember that. All he knew is he woke up and he was just extremely vexed about what he had seen. And it was not just a one-time dream. Keep reading. This is the dream, and we will tell the interpretation therefore, or thereof, before the king. Thou, O king, art a king of kings, for the God of heaven hath given thee a kingdom. Did you see where he started there? And let me say this, no ruler is in place without the God of heaven placing that ruler in place. The Bible says the heart of the king, or the heart of the king is where? In the hand of the Lord. He turneth it whithersoever he will. Okay? He says, for the God of heaven that hath given thee a kingdom, power, strength, and glory. And wheresoever the children of men dwell, the beasts of the field and the fowls of the heaven hath he given into thine hand, and hath made thee ruler over them all. Thou art this head of gold. So that's Nebuchadnezzar. He's at the top. All right? After thee shall arise another kingdom inferior to thee, and another third kingdom of brass, which shall bear rule over all the earth. Do you notice the progression of the material as far as its worth? What we hold it as far as wealth? Gold, silver, brass, and then iron and clay. And the fourth kingdom shall be strong as iron, for as much as iron breaketh in pieces and subdueth all things, and as iron that breaketh all things shall it break in pieces and bruise. And whereas thou sawest the feet and toes, part of potter's clay, part of iron, the kingdom shall be divided. But there shall be in it of the strength of the iron, for as much as thou sawest the iron mixed with the miry clay. And as the toes of the feet were part of iron and part of the clay, so the kingdom shall be partly strong and partly broken. And whereas thou sawest iron mixed with the miry clay, they shall mingle themselves with the seed of men, but they shall not cleave one to another, even as iron is not mixed with clay. In the days of these kings shall the God of heaven set up a kingdom. Who's setting up a kingdom? The God of heaven. And he says, which shall never be destroyed. And the kingdom shall not be left to other people, but it shall break in pieces and consume all these kingdoms, and it shall stand for what? I mean, there ain't a whole lot of interpretation there to put in on this side of Calvary for us to know what that's talking about. For as much as thou sawest that stone was cut out of the mountain without hands, and that it brake in the pieces of iron, the brass, and the clay, and the silver, and the gold, the great God hath made known to the king what shall come to pass hereafter. And the dream is certain, and the interpretation thereof sure. You know what he's saying? Signed, sealed, delivered, that's what it means. Now, what does Nebuchadnezzar do? Somebody else interpret this for me. Is that what he does? No. The Bible says he fell on his face and did what? All right, there's a problem there, but we'll look it up. The king commanded that they should offer an oblation and sweet odors unto him. The king answered unto Daniel and said, of a truth it is that your God is a God of gods, and a Lord of kings, and a revealer of secrets, seeing thou couldst reveal this secret. Then the king made Daniel a great man, and gave him many great gifts, and made him ruler over all the whole province of Babylon, and the chief of the governors over all the wise men of Babylon. Then Daniel requested of the king that he set Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego over the affairs of the province of Babylon. Remember, I was talking about their names, that they were probably some type of, there it is, okay? But Daniel sat in the gate of the king. So here's the separation. All right, what separated Daniel from the other three? Well, the four were separated already, we saw in chapter 1. Now Daniel is elevated and separated above those three. While they're over the affairs of the kingdom, running the kingdom and stuff like that, Daniel is sitting at the gate of the king. What does that mean? I won't call him, he's almost very similar. Probably could compare it, if we were going to compare contrast, say it's the same as what Joseph was in Egypt. That he was Pharaoh's, whatever you want to call him, right-hand man, whatever you want to call it, second behind the king. And that's what happens here. And notice it's Daniel that requests that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be set up in those positions. It wasn't the king that did it. And it's interesting to me that what Daniel said over here, because Daniel again saying it's not me, it's not anything special about me, but where was it at? I meant to bring this word out. There it is, verse 36. This is the dream, and we will tell you. He didn't say, I will tell you. That's a man there who is not about himself. That is not about, hey, look, I'm on all these gifts and stuff like that. Was he promoted? Yeah. Was he lifted up? Yes. The Bible teaches us that if we will humble ourselves before God, God will do what? He will lift us up. And Daniel's going to be in a position to where he is going to have access to, as Daniel correctly identified Nebuchadnezzar there in chapter number 2, that he is, in chapter number 2, he said, where is it at? He said, you are a king of kings, and the God of heaven hath given thee a kingdom and power and strength and glory. He said in verse number, where was it at? That the kingdom coming behind thee was, there it was, verse number 38. He said, wheresoever the children of men dwell, the beasts of the field and the fowls of the heaven, hath he given into thine hand. What's another way of saying that? As far as Nebuchadnezzar and his reign, his realm. Whithersoever the children of men dwell, the beasts of the field and the fowls of the heaven hath he given into thy hand. He's over everything of the world. Yeah. And it says here, and he hath made thee ruler over them all. Not Nebuchadnezzar. God did that, and God did it for a reason. I encourage you to go and read the chapter of Nebuchadnezzar's, won't call it his fall, but his humbling. Because he's not Humpty Dumpty, but he is humbled, and then he comes back and he worships God and realizes who he is and who God is in his place too, that he is nothing more than God's servant and not. And you hear somebody say that to you, you walk around kind of, what is it you do, Josh? You kind of boat chest out and everything else like that. That's not the Daniel doesn't do that here. And we see here in the separation, I'm going to close this on that. So we see now in verse 49, the separation was already in chapter 1 of these 4 from the other children. They weren't the only 4 children coming from out of the nation of Judah, but now these 4, while they're separated, Daniel has now been separated from these 3. And he's, I won't say elevated, but this is why when we read in Daniel chapter 3 about this image of gold, things are going to Nebuchadnezzar's head now that he's getting in his head, hey, I'm going to start to decree things and everything else like that. And what does absolute power do? Nobody above, as far as this world goes, it corrupts absolutely. It's very hard not to. We saw it with Solomon. Solomon wasn't a problem with the most peaceful kingdom ever, but Solomon's problem wasn't with the kingdom. What was Solomon's problem with? What took his heart away from God? Women. Strange wives, okay, women of other nations and that. Nebuchadnezzar's here. He's got all the power, and Solomon had all the wisdom that any man has ever had. You know, underneath the Lord Himself, when He walked this earth, Jesus said, even in all Solomon's glory, he wasn't as beautiful as the lilies are, in that. But as elevated these men were, they still were men. And they still had the capacity, and they did sin. They did fall. Daniel is going to be in this place, and he is separated now. He's elevated, but he sits in the king's gate, in the king's court. He's not about taking a care of businesses. And again, do an interesting study to look up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, Hananiah. Hananiah, I had his name, I keep the middle one, Azariah, and Mishael. Azariah is the one I keep forgetting. Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Look up their Babylonian names, and it's going to give you an indication as to what they were going to be in charge of, or what they possibly did as far as those types of things go. Daniel is now separated from that, again, because he purposed in his heart. Why Daniel? We've seen now. He purposed in his heart. He's not taking any glory for himself. And even this dream for Nebuchadnezzar, it's not even about right now. This is, as he said, latter times. This is literally human history from that point all until the kingdom of God is set up on this earth. And it's not even, I'll make this statement, it's not even this earth, it's the new earth that we're going to see. And, we'll get into that later. Father, thank you for the night you've given to us. Thank you for each one that's here. Pray you'd help us be mindful of your word. Help us to be like Daniel and say it's not because of anything that we do, but because of you. Everything that we say, do, drink, eat, do, not do, whatever it may be, should be for your honor and for your glory, as Daniel did here. Can we help others that need help? Absolutely, but it should be for your glory, by your direction, as Daniel had here in his life. Help us to be that servant that purposes in our heart to not defile ourselves with the king's meat. Not necessarily what we put in our mouth, but what we put in of this world. While we're not in our home, we are here to serve. Doesn't mean we have to compromise, but it does mean that we still do serve. Thank you for loving us, and pray you'd help us now as we go to our homes and our places of work, business, and whatnot, and bring us back safely at the next appointed time. For it's in Christ's name we pray. Amen. All right. May God bless you. Appreciate you coming.